chair of the CBK Pension Fund. Also, we have with us Kent Lebisu, who is the chair of the Libon Group. We have Bilokero, who is a businessman and politician as well, and also the former chair of Finance Committee in the 11th Parliament, the Senator of Mandera. Also, we do have with us Dr. J. McPhee, who is the Director of School of Accountancy at Strathmore University. Right, so before we took a short break, also we were just discussing what is happening right now with the current state of play of the fuel subsidy and the new prices that we have also on the fuel pump right now that is trading at 179.30 cents. That is the new price that you should be intimately acquainted with right now moving forward. And according to Jim McPhee, we are doing fine compared to other countries. Even internationally as it is, we should be thanking God. Tunanyonya matunda ya uhuru as it is. Maybe I should just come now to Professor Dominic Mwenje as well. So, but you know, Kenyans have not been given the full scenario to really accept the reality on the ground. They feel, compared to other countries like Uganda and Tanzania, people are saying, Kenyans are crossing the borders to go to Uganda to buy fuel at a cheaper price. Ours was way above, and they're wondering why. So if you say we actually, benefiting from the fruits of Uhuru at the end of the day, most Kenyans will not really relate to that because they can't get the ramen reason why someone will be going to Uganda to get it cheaply. Then
take one more shot on this issue. Let me just clarify a few things, and this I want to be held to account on that. This country collects more revenue than the entire East African countries combined. I think let us not give an impression that we don't pay taxes. We pay. There are many Kenyans who are not paying. But what we pay still is more than the entire East African countries combined. And that only you can take it back. There was a time when these fact check guys from South Africa called, they wanted to check this. I told them check, and the figures are there when the budgets are announced every year. So the question we have always had here is not about collection of revenue, really. It's how the money is being spent.
That's it.
We are collecting 2 trillion shillings a year. Last year they collected 2 trillion. Our expenditure is 3.3 trillion. We are talking here about a fuel subsidy that has not even been paid, which is being financed by the petroleum so far. But there are 3 things I want to just clarify. One, our average taxes on fuel, when you add up all those 9 items, is about 54%. Let me tell you, the average globally taxes on fuel is between 52 to 59. The highest is in Europe. It's about 15-18% more than in the last few years, particularly after this conflict in Russia. But the average, we are within the average. We are not collecting less taxes, than the rest. But you cannot compare all countries. We are not comparable anywhere with Europe. This is a subsistence economy. This is a country where over nearly half the population cannot even get 100 shillings. To put bread on the table for their kids. It's a poor country. People are struggling to make ends meet. Majority of the people, even the ones who forget about even the 50%, even the remaining 50, some of them can't afford medicals. They don't have free. You don't have a situation where you are employed. In those countries, you are on social security. You get paid. Housing is available if you want. Jobs, education is free in most of those countries. You cannot compare countries. This is a country where everything you have to struggle. Medical you pay, food you pay, school fees. People struggle. So when you put in, when you compare, then the comparison, it won't be right. Lastly, I want to say this, and McPhee is an accountant, he will tell you that, this thing is all about, the revenue you collect on fuel is all about how much fuel is being consumed. Fuel is price sensitive. The moment you increase the price, the consumption will decline. And when the consumption declines, the tax revenues also decline. So if you increase this thing by 20 shillings, if I was running around 100 kilometers a day, I'll reduce it. Because I'll say if the fuel is expensive, I'll reduce my movement. If I reduce, you lose that 54 shillings you're getting per litre.
Indeed.
So you're trying, if the government thinks that by removing the subsidy, they're saving money, that's misplaced completely. Because what happens is that subsidy would have encouraged more consumption. Factories would be running longer hours. transport, people would be taking, all those things that are affected by fuel.
But the sustainability of the
so sustainability now, long term,
yes,
it's a number of factors. One is a global matter. This is an external issue. If the prices, the way they are sliding now, continue to slide, and globally, then it's one of the ways to address it. But more importantly, I think the sustainability will be about what we do with our taxes. We need to address the entire priorities of the government, because you are collecting 2 trillion. You need to prioritize your expenditures. You need to prioritize your programs. The president, in one hand, saying, it's we can't afford, and fuel is the single most important thing in an economy. And then on the other hand, in the same meeting, announces, I want to build 250,000 houses. I mean, to me, that is misplaced priorities. Building houses is not a priority more than this, because this affects the entire economy. It affects your bread, it affects everything of yours, how businesses operate and so forth. So I think some things can be done by the market. You leave houses to the industries, to the private sector. Why does the government have to do some things and then you say you don't have money? So it's about misplaced priorities, in my view. It's not about lack of money. Yep.
So they should incentivize the private sector to give them a good enabling environment to build the houses.
That's it.
Yeah.
Houses.
So they should not be in the
Big
business
Four.
of building houses.
If President William Ruto pursues the Big Four, he will make a big mistake. In my view, you can stick to food security and health. But the other two, even industry, manufacturing, requires a business environment. Reduce some of the taxes. Reduce some of the regulatory, challenges industries are facing. Reduce the cost of freight, occasioned by all these problems between the ports and so forth. There are ways in which industries require environment to be addressed. Housing is a private sector matter that you can create environment for people to put up low-cost housing. But I think the focus should be on food security, on health, and other social issues. Really, education, which is becoming a challenge, and food.
Right.
Deban, I think Bill has brought up a very interesting point. If the price of petrol especially goes up, people will use less. Some people who are driving a car to Nairobi, they'll decide, let me go buy matatu. In fact, that actually helps our traffic jams and so on. But I think it's also very important to keep in mind, you see, that when we buy oil, the price, as I say, has gone up. Basically we're paying today 3 times what we were paying 2 years ago. And what does that contribute to? We have a trade deficit in Kenya. What do we mean by that? What we do, we have to buy goods, certain goods from abroad. We don't actually produce them here in Kenya. For example, we don't have our own source of oil, okay? The amount of oil that we have up in Lodwar, okay, is, it's the wrong type of oil. We can't refine it, etc., etc., etc. So there are certain things that we have to buy from abroad. Now, the fact is that if the petrol price goes up and we actually buy fewer V8s and Prados, etc., actually it helps us. Why? Because in the first 6 months of this year, we had a trade deficit of 814 billion shillings. In other words, we're spending on goods that we buy from abroad 814 billion shillings more than we're getting from what we export. Our principal export market actually is Uganda, but we're exporting to Pakistan tea, coffee, flowers, etc., etc. We even have manufactured goods which we're exporting. Now, that trade deficit a year ago, for the first 6 months of 2021, that trade deficit was 620 billion. It's gone from 620 billion to 814 billion. Why? Well, first of all, goods are actually costing more. And shipping costs are much, much higher this year. For a 20-foot container, you'll pay very much more this year than you were paying a year ago or even 2 years ago.
And the dollar also.
And also, of course, the dollar, in fact, is strengthening as well. So if we buy something designated in dollars, obviously we're going to pay more for it. So now we've also got to keep in mind, that, again, some of the numbers that are quoted are actually wrong. Some people were saying that the money that we were getting from our diaspora had actually gone down. In fact, it's gone up. if you take the first 7 months of this year, the money that we've got from the Kenyan diaspora is $2.36 billion. Last year it was 2.09 billion. So that actually is going up. And, you know, that's one of the ways those people in the diaspora actually help us to pay our bills internationally. But I think it's important here to keep in mind that we do have this incredible trade deficit. And, you know, well, someone has got to supply the money. We have the United Nations here. We have a lot of diplomatic corps living in Nairobi. They're obviously big spenders. They're actually bringing in a lot of the goods. Okay, so, and they then have to pay. They have to bring in dollars or euros or yen or whatever it is to pay for those goods. So we do have a balance there. But I think it's important here, you know, if we can actually reduce the consumption of petrol. Now, diesel is another story, because as Billo rightly says, as even you say, Ken, you know, the position here, okay, is we don't want to try, we want to try to keep the rise in price of food especially to a minimum. We want to help the poor people in Nairobi, well, the poor everywhere in Kenya. Many people, you've got to remember, you see 75% of the population of Kenya lives in the rural areas. So for them, you know, this increase in price of, well, if they're eating unga, but you know, if you go to Western, a lot of people will actually produce their own unga. So, you know, and this is what we've got to try to encourage more and more and more people to become self-reliant. So I think the fact that the consumption of oil will go down, that's going to help us. And that's another reason why I think the president has done the right thing.
But I wanted also to just maybe orient our thoughts towards the fertilizer subsidy as well. Because a lot of these fertilizers that we do have, most of them emanate also from the fossils. For the fossil fuel, isn't it, at the end of the day? Can we gravitate towards now the organic alternative of fertilizer? Because we have the rice sewage here.
And you see, the point here, Debal, in fact, I know a person who's producing potatoes, and he does it organically. Now, all the people around him use fertilizer. You know, fertilizer, which actually, it's one of the reasons why so many of us are getting cancer.
Yes.
Now, the point is, if you use the fertilizer, the artificial fertilizer, your potatoes are twice as big in 45 days rather than in 90 days. So he is actually using organic fertilizer, producing fantastic potatoes, but he has to wait 90 days for his crop instead of 45. And so the result is, he talks to the other people, look, this fertilizer is killing Kenyans, it's giving them cancer. Wacha, you know, this is pesa baya, you know? So, you know, the problem is, we Kenyans, we don't do the right thing. And I've got a friend, okay, who's got some land up in Muranga, and all around his place, he uses organic fertilizer. You know, we've got cows, we've got, you know, chickens, we've got everything under the sun. We can use for organic fertilizer, but we don't. And the problem is, you know, we're actually destroying the soil in the land using this artificial fertilizer. So what you're suggesting is absolutely correct. Let's use less of this imported fertilizer. But, you know, it's a little bit more work, and, you know, we're trying to take shortcuts all the time, unfortunately.
And I think also we have Johnson Sakaja, maybe. His work is really cut out when it comes to solid waste management. If we can harness that, a lot of it in this particular city, we can get a good tidy sum of amount of organic fertilizer. This is just to put it on the table, because I know, first of all, here also there was another development that occurred yesterday. I don't know if we'll put it on the table to discuss as well, on the interest of time, because of the Western Saharan country, right? And the Morocco, just the diplomatic sort of tip that we saw yesterday, bearing to this as well. And people are talking about the national interest of a country.
Yeah,
On a broader spectrum of fertilizer. because this, I see that we have the president who has pronounced that we should have the subsidies at 3,500 from 6,000 as it is, and he has to deliver. And where do we get the source of fertilizer? Morocco is one of the countries that actually export fertilizer to Kenya and most countries around Africa at the end of the day. And we have Sahrawi, the small country of 600,000 people. International community has been recognizing it as an independent country, or a sovereign country as it is, but now Kenya has opted not to recognize it in light of what we said yesterday. Could you talk about the national interest, and even when we're talking about fertilizer, because now I think the fertilizer question is becoming a very pivotal question that need to be broached.
Yeah. Let me first of all comment, because I'm in the space of agriculture, and it's important that we cushion our farmers.
You don't use fertilizer yourself with the hydroponics.
No, we use now because we are doing both now, open farming and the hydroponics farming as well. We combine both because not all products can be grown hydroponically.
Okay.
Now the issue of farm subsidies is extremely important for the farmers in order for them to bring the cost of food down, also to increase the yield of the products. Now, the issue of safety, that's another issue that needs to be addressed because we know some of the areas where we use a lot of fertilizers, especially for fresh fruits and vegetables. We also have higher instances of cancer as well. Now, if you look at the US, for example, they spend $20 billion a year subsidizing farmers. That's about 2.1 million farmers. And those farmers are in the staple part of the staples. It's in corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, and rice. 2.1 million farmers, they receive about 20 billion every single year. If you go to Europe and you try to remove subsidies for farmers in Europe, you are in trouble. Because you remember a few years ago in France, the farmers of tomatoes and potatoes, they actually dumped them all over Paris, because when the cost of production of food goes up, the food prices at the supermarkets and everywhere else goes up too, and it becomes impossible for farmers to make a profit. And therefore, it is important that the farmers are subsidized in whichever way it's possible. Whichever way is possible, either at the pricing level of the end product or for the inputs. And for the input is extremely key. And therefore, when you look at the ecosystem of farming, it's good that the government takes that into consideration. The cost of fertilizer, the cost of inputs, the more we lower the cost of inputs and we increase the use of the modern science technology in farming, the more yield we have per square foot. And when that is the case, then the farmers are able to get a little bit more returns on their investment. And then they can make a living off farming. And that's what we need to encourage our farmers to do, make a living off farming. Like the president of AFDB says, Africa needs to start taking farming as a business, not a hobby. And therefore, when you're enslaved to your 1 acre or 2 acres of land, then it's not helping you as a family, because you're only growing enough for you to feed your family, and therefore you're not able to take care of your kids. Now, with that, if we're able to bring down the cost of inputs, then we are looking at getting these farmers to have better yield, appropriate demand, better prices in the market, and then they have a sustainable income for their families. For me, that's very, very important.
Kent.
Yes, on the issue of, before we come to that's
Western Sahara.
Western Sahara, I think Bilo will have more to talk about that. But there have been several studies done in this country in the agricultural sector. One was done at the University of Nairobi, where they were trying to look at the impact of subsidies. And I believe it was Dr. Makau who did that. And two important things come out of it. Number one is something we call direct benefit transfer. When you have a subsidy and you talk of direct benefit transfer, Professor is very familiar with this, the intended beneficiaries receive the benefit. Unfortunately,
That's the difference. Yes.
unfortunately, you'll find that even this year, in April, we were told there was going to be subsidized fertilizer. I'm a farmer in Kitale, we never saw it. But as far as the ministry was concerned, the fertilizer had been given. To whom? Probably the people who don't need that subsidy received that fertilizer. Secondly, some of the unscrupulous business people receive these subsidized programs and resell it on the market. Yeah. And that is a common practice. So, when it comes to subsidy, I think we need to deal with direct benefit transfer. If the policy is that the smallholder farmers are the ones to be supported to increase their food production, let's have a coupon system. Let us have something where you can identify. When you redeem your coupon, you pick your fertilizer. Then we know who has received it. As it is right now, laissez-faire, it's very difficult to monitor. Like any other subsidy in this country, whether it's low-cost housing, it's anything, it is rich people, well-connected people who benefit from that. That is one. The second thing, which was also part of that research from the Nairobi University, they were talking about the National Accelerated Agricultural Input Access Program. National Accelerated Agricultural Input Access Program. So we have a plan, and we say, with this access to the inputs, we have a direct impact. We have government institutions that are supposed to do this work. There is the National Cereals and Produce Board. There is the Agricultural Finance Corporation. Now, for these programs to work, let's empower these institutions. When it comes to issue of food strategic reserve, that is under the National Cereals and Produce Board. When it comes to agricultural financing and support, let it go through the agricultural finance. Meaning that even if the farmer received, for example, and it used to be like that in the 60s and 70s in this country, if the farmer receives 10 bags or 20 bags of fertilizer, they don't have to pay for it in cash. It is recorded, and the government has a sort of claim on the produce from the farmer. Which means at the end of the season, when the farmer gets their yield, the amount which was advanced to them can be redeemed. That is a way of securing national strategic food reserve. But you see, why are these two organizations not empowered? Because it's easier to make money for those who want to make money outside public corporations. So you find somebody importing in the fertilizer, selling it at whatever price they want to sell it without regulation. But you see, with these government agencies, which by law are supposed to do those particular functions, it is easier to monitor and control what is happening. So let's just go back to the basics and say, why were these institutions set up? One is to help with strategic food reserve, and the other one is to finance agricultural organization.
All right. You still want to go to that particular
Bill will
That's very
explain to you why
setting
that
you up.
doesn't work.
No, it works. But I think the issue of Western Sahara, that's
Yes.
what you asked.
Yes.
You know, when I was in Pan-African Parliament, we debated a lot to support a lot of countries, by the way, in the world. Before Trump did what he did, you remember when he, over 80 countries did recognize Western Sahara Republic. But in recent years after that, you know, the way the US would, when Trump insisted that it does not have time for those, for that country, and it said that that land belongs to Morocco and so forth, a few countries have backtracked. But even now, over 40 countries do recognize that country. But I think the concern is a bit more of the way the president just through a Twitter. I think it did not. Even if you want to downgrade your relationship with another country, I think there's a better way to do it through your foreign ministry.
This is your girlfriend.
But
this is your girlfriend breaking with you through the SMS.
But if the reason for doing that is because of because he was receiving a special message at the time from yesterday from Morocco, the Moroccan king. So so we all think that it probably has to do with the fertilizer. Everyone knows that Morocco is one of the world's largest producers of fertilizers. I think it's in the top 5 globally. And there has been talk, you remember a few years ago, around 2019, of getting the largest Moroccan company to come and set up that fertilizer plant in Kenya. If the intention, of course, there has been a lot of talks when they came to power, Uhuru and Ruto in 2013. Fertilizer, by the way, has been an issue in all the governments from way up to today. It's the plate for fertilizer. It's been there. So in 2019, I remember when 2013, when they came in, there was also the issue of getting the Russians to provide the cheapest fertilizer. And of course, all these things, none of them has worked. And I think the issue about our cost of maize, production of maize, has not really been only limited to fertilizer. We know that. I mean, everyone imports fertilizer. Uganda imports fertilizer. Everyone imports fertilizer. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of during Kibaki's time, when Kibaki came to power in 2013, they developed revitalization of agriculture policy paper, you remember? And one of the focus really was to deal with regulatory or policy issues that is affecting agriculture, more than even the fertilizer. Because even when we have reduced the fertilizer prices over the years, through various interventions during the Uhuru time or Kibaki time, we still haven't been out of the woods on production of maize. But I think if the intention of the president yesterday on Sahara is to get closer to Morocco so that we can get fertilizer more competitively on a better deal, so that he can meet the pledge he made of a subsidy, I think then he can do it without doing it the way he did to the Saharan Republic. But I think fertilizer, I think I agree with my colleagues. What he said the other day, that he'll reduce he'll provide a subsidy is good. But the impact of a subsidy, I think the gentlemen are farmers better than I am. It will take a few months. I think if you provide fertilizer for the short rain, the harvest would be in March, isn't it? On those sides. But in the interim, the Unga issue is still a hot potato, and something needs to be done. To be done in the interim. Of course, that's a medium-term, long-term. The issues, all those things are medium-term, short-term actions. But I think in the interim, something needs to be done on the because especially now that these guys the millers are insisting they need to be paid that 7 billion. Otherwise, they have no money to buy maize.
Isn't it interesting that just to note, from different regimes, how we've been, doubling to and fro and toing and froing between, Sahrawi and Morocco, even with the previous regime before Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto. By then, we had Kibaki regime, and it was leaning more towards Western Sahara than Morocco. So it is a game of politics and a game of geopolitics at the end of the day.
It's geopolitics.
It's geopolitics.
It's geopolitics. I mean,
but how historical is it? Because this harks back to the Casablanca, if you may remember, the Kwame Nkrumah faction of the AU and the Casablanca. If maybe you can just tell us even how history is bearing to where we are with this particular country.
No, I'm not very good in history, but there's no doubt there's a lot of geopolitics on this matter. When our relationship was very good with Algeria, then of course we supported Sahrawi Republic. When it goes to the other side, to Morocco, then again we swing back. And this happened to a number of countries. Even India, I remember, one of the largest countries to recognize a few years ago, but by 2020 they had changed their mind again because of when Trump visited. So there's a lot of geopolitics on these things, and it's about the relative pressures from these two countries, Algeria and Morocco, more than anything else.
Yeah.
But you know, for the basic history, the point is, here is a country, a region that is really predominantly occupied by that community, and you know, part of it is independent, part of it is being occupied, and you know, Morocco is claiming you know, the Western Saharan part of it, and so forth. So, but if you look back to what has happened in South Sudan, the way that the world, you know, came and said, you know, South Sudan should be, you know, when you look at the way it has happened in East Timor, and when you look at the way the world addresses similar issues, you find there is lack of consistency, really, and it's all about the geopolitics at the end of the day. Otherwise, the history is the same. Here is a, you know, a group that believes that the region needs to have its own country and its own independence, and you know, it should form part of its country and so forth. And that's why you find, unlike some other countries, you know, this one is recognized by many countries because their case seems to be strong, and they have been admitted to most of the international institutions. I mean, they have observer status, even in, I think, in the UN, and that's why even in our function on the other day, they were invited as a country.
Yeah.
And their president came all the way.
Ironically. Little do they know.
I think
so, yeah, was this really coming...
Maybe he was to be informed in person.
Was it an afterthought, truly? Because even for you to just list this particular country, on just a diplomacy sort of, you know, handle on it.
No, I was because I was there. I was sitting with some of the envoys, and you can tell they were like, "Oh, Morocco is not going to be very happy with this," and it did happen. It's a Taiwan-China scenario. That's what we are looking at, really. Taiwan, China. Whether you want, you know, people who have the right for self-determination, or you have this other stronger person with more economic muscle. So it's the geopolitics of balancing all this between politics and economics on a regional level.
And the Moroccan envoy came with a message yesterday.
What was the message?
It was in the State House. You saw that on the news.
Yeah.
And then shortly afterwards, the tweet.
The tweet happens.
Yes.
But Dibala, at the end of the day, our foreign policy, like any other country, must be guided by our national interest. And that's, I think, where this is going. But you've given the example of Taiwan and China. We saw what happened recently to one of the major superpowers. It's national interest. So maybe in this particular issue, we may not be privy to all the discussions, but there must have been a national interest issue that guided that decision.
All foreign policies are actually configured to,
So for those
your national interest.
National interest.
So that is off the table. We know it is just about fertilizer. That is our national interest right now, according to the pronouncement of the president. Yes, it is just a pity that Western Sahara had to be the collateral damage on this. I wanted just to orient our thought even back to just the energy shock that we have in the world and how we can get an alternative. Because you mentioned nuclear, right? Fukushima, I think it was
Yes, myself.
Fukushima.
Yeah.
And we have the Kenya Nuclear Agency here. I think it's a time we should broach the subject also of an alternative source of energy, which is nuclear. For the last almost 13 good years, we've never really known what is happening with this particular agency. And we could see a few months, people were questioning, should we do away with the Kenya Nuclear Agency because we can't see the requisite benefit that is coming from there. Or maybe they've not been fully communicating what is happening in terms of us as a country having an alternative source of energy. There has been the security component of it, how secure it is, and I think that was also a niggling worry for Japan, bearing the fact they had the Fukushima ordeal that affected them as well. But from your own assessment, this particular agency, are you privy to what they've been doing and where we are headed? Because I remember by 2024 or 2023, they had promised at least we'll have sort of reactors here in the country, if I may remember, sort of an infrastructure. I don't know what that could be. I'm not really privy to the nuclear science as it is?
Well, if you look at the national plan for electricity generation in the year 2040, nuclear is zero.
Nuclear zero.
Nuclear zero. And I think you bring up a very good point. Do we really need that particular agency? Should it be within energy? Because, the fact is that nuclear also has effects on medicine, etc., okay, and, it exists. You were mentioning a little bit earlier, status is expensive. Now, we need to go to the world and say, well, our nuclear energy department is, doing such and such and such a thing. But the actual plan to bring in a nuclear power plant is zero at the moment in Kenya. Now, I think it's always important to keep in mind that when you're going to put in a nuclear power plant, it takes years to build it. They're building one in the UK at the moment, and I don't know, I think it's going to be ready in 6 years' time or something of that nature. So, but I go back to, we've got one of the best sources of energy in the world, geothermal,
Yes.
which, Iceland has got, New Zealand has got, but, we have 89 wellheads which can be connected today, and we haven't done it because of politics. This politics that we're talking about. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about politics, really what we're talking about is that Tom, Dick, or we know is going to benefit at the expense of all the other people, possibly even all the other people in the country. And so I think we've got to be very, very critical, and I just hope President Ruto is going to face this and say, now look, let's actually develop these geothermal sources, because we've got it there. It's incredibly good power. It's absolutely stable. When you look at wind and solar, it's going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. It's inferior to geothermal. But KenGen somehow has not actually, has not been looked at favorably by the GDC, because the GDC is funded entirely by the Kenya government, because the whole thing of drilling for steam is a very, very risky thing. KenGen, which is a kind of commercial entity, can't actually afford to do that. But GDC is using government money so that if in fact they drill a well and it turns out to be bure kabisa, then in that particular case the government can take the shock of that. KenGen couldn't do that. But as I mentioned, there are 89 wellheads available today, and we're not actually using them to generate power. Now, that won't be something that you can just click your fingers and have the power tomorrow, but that is available. And I think it's so important. Number one, we've got to be aware of it, and number two, let's think about the future of Kenya. Instead of thinking about the future of, Tom, Dick, or Owino. That's my point, really, And the thing is that nuclear also, South Africa has got a nuclear power plant. It hasn't solved their problems, okay? So, in this case here, Eskom, it's mind you, they've also got a lot of coal-fired power plants, which, but at the moment, you see, Colombia in South America has actually exported 2 million tons of coal this year to Europe. South Africa, 850,000 tons to Europe. Australia, 2 million tons of coal to Europe. So Europe is actually bringing back all of these coal-powered electricity plants because of the fact that, this thing, well, they're not getting gas from Russia, so they've got to think of how are we going to generate electricity. But as I mentioned, in Germany, a steel plant is being closed down. In Poland, another one is being closed down. So the fact is, you just got to keep in mind, Billo is saying, okay, we can't think about other countries, but I think we've got to look to see, this is not only a problem in Kenya, it's a problem all over the world at the moment.
Indeed,
You know?
indeed. And even as you're talking about Kengen, I remember they were they wanted to, or they are planning to diversify into other productions, even fertilizer itself.
Correct.
I think President Ruto now should broach that particular issue with Kengen. Why is below?
We discussed that and we said, I think
they have
that's
the
misplaced.
green hydrogen, we have ammonia, yeah, in Olkaria. I think they are actually sending out proposals out there for people to bring the consultancy.
No, we discussed that issue of Kengen, and you remember a few weeks ago we said that let's let Kengen focus on its core mandate of generating power. And I think I agree with Dr. McPhee that we have no place for nuclear energy at the moment. Apart from the very cheap and very efficient and green source of energy, the geothermal, which we have, which is not exploited, even just exploited a small fraction of it. There's also huge deposits of coal, you remember, in Kitui and those areas that were to be exploited. Right now, all our factories, we import coal from South Africa or Tanzania, to run our plants. So I think that there is an opportunity for a lot of that in this country. So I don't think nuclear is something we can afford before even you talk of any other factor, the affordability. So that NGO, which was that state corporation which was set up and spent a lot of money the last few years, well, I think the sooner they wind it up, the better.